You know, one of the most interesting aspects of this series is that the original Super Mega Baseball was a relatively niche title, and it was its sequel that really brought this into becoming kind of a like a viral phenomenon back in 2018. I remember there was a video of SMB2 tweeted by Dan Reicher, the former Giant Bomb writer, that got over like 2 million views in May 2018. It's kind of a rare thing to see in games where the first game in a series is, you know, mildly successful, finds its kind of niche, and then the sequel really breaks out. Generally, it doesn't happen like that. Generally, you have, you know, your first game has to be very successful in order to see a sequel that sees, you know, even that range of success.
Video games are a particularly interesting sort of media where the costs required in their production often require for a series to be immediately highly successful if there's any hope for its future. The recent past in gaming is littered with examples of would-be franchises that only got the one shot, regardless of quality, even in the more flexible independent sphere. Generally, if your game doesn't break out in its first shot, it doesn't break out as a series. Since the margins in gaming are so slim, development costs so much that a developer really needs to make bank off of a game in order to see the growth necessitated by the economic structure of the day, you rarely see a moderately successful game get followed up by a hugely successful sequel, typically because the developer doesn't get the chance to produce a sequel. It's more common in film. Take, for example, the John Wick series, the modern Batman series, the Austin Powers series of the late 90s, the 80s Lethal Weapon series, the Bad Boys series. This phenomenon in film is referred to as the breakout sequel. Now, the breakout sequel does happen in gaming. The best example would be the Street Fighter series, which has a second game still beloved by the fighting game community at large, and an initial game forgotten by history and time, and rightfully so. More recently, there was the revered and beloved Red Dead Redemption, which followed the forgotten Red Dead Revolver. Super Mega Baseball 2 is a good example of a rare gaming breakout sequel. The first game was released exclusively digitally on the PlayStation Store in January of 2015. It was well received critically, but relatively closed off to potential players because of its exclusivity to PSN for at least the first 6 months of its release. The sequel saw a much larger audience base because of its expanded availability. So why is that important? I think it puts the third game into an interesting and very particular context. You see, the second game in the series was significantly different from the first in a few key ways. The character models were made more realistic. A core component of player creation where a character's dimensions would alter their abilities was cut. Players seemed to run faster. The entire game really felt faster, and pitching was significantly altered as well. All in all, the first game resembles a very well fleshed out proof of concept, and the second game carries it further into being a genuinely excellent game. Those significant and, I think, effective changes made in the second game set the scene for the third, and there is no going back to the original. The small ballparks and the characters that look straight out of the game of life for the original PlayStation are not coming back. A breakout sequel also means that expectations for the third game were higher. The changes made needed to be, in my mind, just as significant to push the franchise even further forward. Within the game, there was a major change to the functionality of power pitching. In prior games, holding the button down for too long meant your pitch went off in one specific direction. Now, if you hold the button down for too long, it means it flies off in kind of a wide radius, so even once you've thrown the pitch, you don't know for sure where it's going. Also, in pitching, your catcher can now let balls pass, and if a ball is dropped on the third strike, the burden falls on the catcher to throw the batter out. Runners can advance on wild pitches as well. The pitcher can also throw pickoffs to first and second if they suspect a runner is about to steal. Base running has changed as there's an element of timing to stealing bases now that was not there before. In the prior games, prompting a runner to steal would have them take off right as the pitcher threw the ball. In this game, they go as soon as you prompt them to do so, which makes stealing much more difficult. In terms of batting, certain teams have a designated hitter, much like the American League teams in Major League Baseball do. Fielding, for the most part, was left intact from the prior game. On a structural level, there is the addition of a franchise mode wherein the player takes control of a team, makes transactions between players, gives them statistical updates, and tries to maintain a successful franchise over several seasons. Most of the other modes are about the same, though, including a team customization, though I think you might expect that to be added upon in later downloadable content. Finally, on I guess you would call this personnel level, there are 4 new teams, each with new players, and many players have moved from team to team. Speaking of which,
I was initially very disappointed to see this image tweeted by the Super Mega Baseball development team back during the spring of former Overdogs player Marsha Brown wearing the uniform of a new team in SMB3 named the Sandcats.
Marsha had been a critical figure for me in the second game, wherein she played for the speed-heavy Overdogs team. I played through seasons with many teams in the second game, but my favorite remains the Overdogs, a team that's just unbelievably fun to play with. Anytime you get a player on base, you feel as if there's a good chance of breaking the game wide open by stealing second, then getting good contact, and sending that runner home. That's one of my favorite styles of baseball, using your team's speed to overwhelm the opponent. Marsha was one of the most consistent players on that team, both in terms of reaching base and then successfully being able to steal when the time came to it. So it saddened me to know that I couldn't play with that same incarnation of the Overdogs in the new game. But also, I think that player movement like this is an interesting wrinkle to baseball, and I overall liked the fact that it's reflected in this game.
So I grew up a fan of the Kansas City Royals, which is a team very well known for not hanging on to talent.
We've lost a lot of players over the years, from David Cohn to Johnny Damon to Carlos Beltran to Lorenzo Cain to Eric Hosmer to Zach Greinke to Bo Jackson to Billy Butler to Jermaine Dye to Greg Holland to Mike Moustakas to Raul Ibanez to Dean Palmer to Danny Tartabull to a lot of guys. It's part of the game is what I'm trying to convey here. For that to be accurately represented in this game, it's kind of neat. Especially having played as much of the second game as I did. I like playing it now and seeing all the players I've used before taking on different roles. It's one of the things about this series having completely original players and teams that I did not foresee. I developed a fondness for my former players, and when they come back into the game at different points, it provides a hit of familiarity and almost appreciation for what they used to be to me. It's not too dissimilar from when you see guys who had good careers and leave teams on good terms come back to the stadium again and get an ovation from the crowd. I like how that can be replicated in this game.
For a very long time in games, it was actually pretty okay not to have an official league license in your sports game. You had cases like Bases Loaded and Virtuous Striker and Super High Impact that didn't feature real team names, but still found a pretty good amount of success back at least in the 1990s. Now, when it broke into the 2000s during the PlayStation 2 Xbox era, that kind of started to change, and there are a couple of reasons why.
I think the expansion of the graphical capability, for the first time when you could look at a player and honestly connect them to their real-life counterpart, made this significant. Plus, there was this expansion of the athlete as celebrity after the era of Michael Jordan in the 1990s. And then also, for a period of time, professional leagues were really loose about who got to make their games in a way that just isn't the case anymore. Within about the past decade and a half, it's far less common to see the non-licensed sports game succeed. This is exemplified by how games like Sega Soccer Slam, Pure Football, Backbreaker, and Tecmo Bowl Throwback basically died at takeoff. This franchise has found a way to use a lack of a Major League Baseball license to its advantage. The best decision that Metalhead chose to make was not only to create each of these unique teams with silly names like Sirloins and Crocodons, but also to fill them with uniquely created characters. They could have easily filled them with AI-generated placeholders and told the players to create their own. but instead they put a good amount of effort into making each player feel like a special creation. Some players have names that fit their playstyle, like the Sirloin's Hammerlong Ballo, or the Overdog's Robin Yu, or the Moose's Close de Game. The cast of players is filled with such great diversity. Every team introduces you with this group of very fun and colorful players, each with unique playstyles. I can tell you that I use Blowfish shortstop Elvis Stanley differently from the way that I use Herbisaur's shortstop Annabella Stokes, and that's accurate to real baseball. It's one of the things that makes baseball such a wonderful game, that two great players in the same position can be so unique. This level of creativity allowed the original to overcome the potential pitfalls of being unlicensed, and the second and third games have only improved on that.
So as I said before, I never played the original game when it was new, and I thought that I needed to change that, to go get some perspective and some context on the series. So back in April, in preparation for the new game coming out, I went and purchased the first game off of Steam for $15, and this is my experience with it.
So going back and playing the original reveals just how effective each of the additions from game to game have improved the base game. The original is an excellent game. It's a very simple and easy to understand take on the game of baseball, something very valuable during an era in 2015 where sports games seem to be getting more and more complex to the point of alienation. When I go back and play the original game and I try to think of what's missing, nearly everything I can name are things that ended up being added in the next two games. Having every pitcher be able to throw all 8 pitches makes them all too similar. The players move a little too slowly for me. The character models are just kind of not my thing. And all of those things changed over the next two games, and I'd really say for the better. It really speaks to how excellent of a job has been done on this series by the developers Metalhead Software. Metalhead is a development studio based out of Victoria, British Columbia. They don't have a lot of their history listed on their website, but from what I could tell, they started as a 4-person team with development on a project originally named Big Fly Baseball as far back as early 2012. That eventually evolved into the game that we know today, and at this point they have only released games in this Super Mega Baseball series, but they're operating at 3 for 3 so far, and I'm excited to see where they go next. At this point, it is astounding to see the process from a very high quality but quite simple early entry into this most recent entry, which has kept so much of the simplicity and ease of access intact while making the game satisfyingly more complex, perhaps best exemplified by this game's addition of the franchise mode.
I think this is the first game that I've played that didn't have a professional league license, but had a franchise mode that I actually played the franchise mode in. Now, if there's any game series that deserves for that to be the case, it's this one.
It was a recurring feeling that I had in the second game. I would finish a season, be it in triumph in the championship or in a difficult playoff series loss, and I'd want more. To look at my lineup, think, well, I've got enough speed, I need a consistent power hitter, I wish I could add one. The franchise mode provides both of those, though imperfectly. This aspect of the game is both the part with which I've spent the most time and also the one that I treat with the most scrutiny. Having to trade in and out players from your team to this pool of free agents is the best way that I think this game could have made player movement work, but I also would have liked for direct player swaps between teams to be possible. I can understand why they didn't do this, because it is very annoying to play in like the managerial role in any, licensed realistic game and to have to deal with turning down trade request after trade request for your best players, so I suppose SMB3 saved us that headache. And that's one part of the mode that I can understand. The part that I really don't understand and also don't care for is the player development aspect. Each improvement you value for your players seems to go away after just a few games, so it all feels a little pointless, and I really don't think you feel the effects of player improvement over the course of the season. But regardless, the actual ability to have continuity over time, to build up multiple season storylines, to make player movement happen, I'm glad we have it in this one. It's great to be able to play significant playoff series and then recognize those matchups again in the next season as important rivalry games. You have to use some imagination for that, but it's a fun wrinkle I like to add to my games, and I always had. See, when I was a young kid, I used to put the little, like, Riddell NFL football helmets on my G.I. Joes and Beanie Babies, and I would play football with them. I grew up loving watching the great NFL film specials about all the, the pro football lore, and I wanted to make that myself, so I would do, like, make-believe football with these toys, and it was like a longitudinal, years-long series of football games and seasons, and they had these intersecting storylines and types of lore and rivalries, and it was very weird in retrospect, knowing that my other friends were like having army men shoot each other or whatever, or maybe playing real football. But when I see Slash Trips from the Sawteeth come up to bat, a guy who killed each of my players in the championship series, I remember that, and I want to strike him out. It is incredible that this game has reproduced those feelings of that childhood whimsy in a 25-year-old, cynical, beaten down man like myself.
Uh-oh, I'll make up for it now. Back.
I think that the best aspect of this game, and this is going to sound weird, is that when I am calm and collected, I play well, and when I am emotionally compromised, I play very poorly.
I love that a game can make that happen. I think that this emotional aspect really reflects the heart of baseball, and in a way more than just in the, Joaquin Andujar in Game 7 of 1985 way. Baseball is one of the rare games wherein scoring can happen at uneven and unpredictable intervals. On a single play, it is possible for anywhere between 1 and 4 runs to score. What would seem to be a comfortable 7-3 lead can be completely dashed with a few solid hits from the opposite team. It is a game that can change, and change so severely, in seconds. A game in which momentum is not only so significant, but able to grow and falter so quickly. This game gets that. You feel the pressure, you feel the significance of the moment, both when it's your turn to make the moment, and when it's your turn to dash it. As I said in my video about the second game, this series gets at something at the heart of the game of baseball. I compare the way that this series reflects the feeling of a great game of baseball with the way the games like Skate 3 get at the exploration and freedom of skateboarding, and how a game like Animal Crossing gets at the creativity and procurement and serendipity that makes setting up your home enjoyable. It's not a simulation in the way that it reflects each individual detail, it's a simulation in terms of what it evokes inside you.
Holy cow!
So maybe I wasn't swept off of my feet by this game the way that I was the second, but that's no fault of Super Mega Baseball 3. I was surprised by the second game. I had huge expectations for the third, and this game met them. This game is about as good as I expected it to be, which in a way is a bit of a disappointment when my experience with the second was so surprising and euphoric. But at the end of the day, I keep playing this game. I have not been able to stop playing this game. That's how much I like it. This is a better game than the sequel. Maybe I'm not as poetic about it, maybe I'm not as euphoric about it as I was on the second game back in 2018, but that is the truth of this, is that honestly, if I cut out all of the outside, all of the emotion and the mindset I've been in, if I were to pick to play either the second or the third, I would play the third, and that is the best support that I can give this. That is the best critical statement I can give on Super Mega Baseball 3. It is a better game than the second game, which I called one of my favorites of all time and still do. I cannot recommend this enough. I put it into so many words. I wrote so much about this and I spent the whole summer kind of writing this video, just trying to figure out what my opinion on this game was because I love it so much. It's almost past the point of feeling critical, just to the point where I just want to understand the way that I feel about this video game. And that's something that I don't get with a lot of video games. I have to genuinely really love something in order to put this amount of time and effort into honestly feeling, having this sort of critical thought about it. So I can't recommend it enough. I hope it inspires the same sort of intense thought and feeling in other people as it has in me. That's really all that I can say about it.